The wind howled, a frigid, merciless beast tearing across the snow-laden peaks of the Montana wilderness. Elias hunched deeper into his worn parka, the biting cold seeping into his bones despite the thick layers. His breath plumed in white clouds before him, vanishing into the gray, oppressive sky. He'd been tracking a particularly elusive elk for 2 days, and while the hunt had yielded nothing but frostbite and frustration, a glint of movement in a shallow ravine caught his eye. It was a wolf, not just any wolf, but a large, magnificent specimen, its fur the color of twilight shadows, now matted with ice and something darker. It lay slumped against a snowdrift, one leg twisted at an unnatural angle, its ragged breaths puffing out in short, desperate bursts. One eye, a startling amber, flickered open, then glazed over with pain. Elias, a man hardened by years in the wild, felt a pang of something he rarely allowed himself to feel. Pity. He knew the unwritten laws of nature, the brutal efficiency of survival, but to leave such a creature to a slow, agonizing death felt wrong. He approached cautiously, rifle unslung but held loosely. The wolf made no move to snarl or lunge, its energy clearly spent. A raw, gaping wound marred its flank, likely from a run-in with a grizzly, or, more chillingly, a poacher's snare. The air around it hummed with a desperate stillness. Elias knelt, his movements slow and deliberate, speaking in a low, rumbling voice he used with skittish deer. "Easy there, fella. Easy now." He knew the risks. A cornered animal, even one this weak, could still inflict serious damage. But the wolf merely watched him, its amber eye now fully open, a flicker of something almost like resignation in its depths. He assessed the damage quickly. The leg was definitely broken, a clean snap above the paw. The flank wound, while deep, wasn't actively bleeding as much as he'd feared, but it looked infected. Without intervention, this wolf was as good as dead. A swift bullet would be the merciful choice, but something held his hand. Maybe it was the sheer defiance in that single amber eye, refusing to close even in the face of oblivion. Or perhaps it was the sheer isolation of the moment. Just him and this dying creature in the vast, indifferent wilderness. He made a decision, one that went against every practical fiber of his being. He would try to save it. Retrieving his medkit from his pack, Elias began to work with a practiced efficiency born of years of patching himself up in remote locations. He first gently cleaned the wound on its flank with antiseptic wipes, the wolf flinching only slightly, a low growl rumbling in its chest. "Hush now, just trying to help," Elias murmured, his voice surprisingly gentle. He applied a thick layer of antibiotic ointment and bandaged it tightly, improvising with strips of cloth from an old shirt. The leg was more problematic. He couldn't set it properly out here without proper tools or sedation. He carefully fashioned a makeshift splint from 2 sturdy branches and some spare rope, wrapping it around the broken limb as securely as he could. The wolf whimpered, a sound that tore at something deep inside Elias. He then hoisted the shivering animal, surprisingly light given its size, into his arms. The wolf tensed, a low, weak growl rumbling in its throat, but didn't resist beyond that initial tremor. Its breath was warm against Elias's neck as he carefully navigated the treacherous terrain back to his makeshift camp. The small, canvas tent, barely more than a lean-to, offered scant protection against the elements, but it was better than nothing. He laid the wolf gently by the dying embers of his small fire, its amber eyes tracking his every move. A silent, intense gaze that seemed to bore into his very soul. He spent the rest of the night tending to the creature, spoon-feeding it, melted snow and offering slivers of dried venison, which it mostly ignored. Elias monitored its condition, checking its pulse, listening to its shallow breathing. He knew the odds were stacked against it. Even if it survived the immediate crisis, a wild animal, especially a predator, was unlikely to tolerate human proximity for long. Yet, as the first pale light of dawn began to paint the eastern sky, the wolf's shivering subsided slightly, and its breathing seemed to ease. A fragile hope, as delicate as the frost on the tent fabric, began to bloom in Elias's chest. For the next few days, Elias put his hunt on hold. He became the wolf's reluctant nurse. He cleaned its wounds twice a day, changed its bandages, and continued to offer it food and water. Slowly, painstakingly, the wolf began to recover. Its fever broke, its eyes regained their sharp, intelligent glint, and it even managed to lap at the water Elias offered. There were times the wolf would snarl, its teeth bared, a reminder of its wild nature, but Elias never faltered. He spoke to it constantly, a soothing monotone that seemed to calm the animal, telling it about the mountains, about the silence, about anything that came to mind. He even gave it a name, Wolf, simple and direct, just like the creature itself. As the days turned into a week, Wolf started to show more signs of life. It would lift its head when Elias approached, sometimes even allowing a tentative touch to its matted fur. The broken leg, though still splinted, seemed less painful, and Wolf would occasionally try to shift its weight, a hopeful sign of healing. Elias knew the time was coming when he'd have to release it, but the thought brought a strange ache to his chest. He, the solitary mountain man, had formed an unlikely bond with this wild creature. It was an unspoken understanding, a shared struggle against the harsh realities of their world. But then, one afternoon, as Elias was stirring his meager stew, Wolf let out a low, guttural growl, not of pain or warning, but of something else entirely. Elias looked up, his spoon pausing mid-air, and then he saw it. Wolf's head was still low, but its hackles were slightly raised, and its gaze wasn't fixed on Elias. A faint, almost imperceptible rustle of dry leaves, then the crunch of snow outside. Elias reached instinctively for his rifle, his heart thudding a frantic rhythm against his ribs. He'd been so focused on the wolf, so consumed by the delicate dance of its recovery, that he'd let his guard down. He cursed himself silently. A shadow fell across the tent opening, long and distorted in the late afternoon sun. Then, a figure stepped into view. A man bundled in furs, his face a mosaic of weathered lines and grizzled beard. He held a high-powered hunting rifle, casually in one hand, its barrel glinting ominously. His eyes, cold and calculating, swept from Elias to the wolf, then back again, a slow, predatory appraisal. "Well, well," the man drawled, his voice a gravelly rasp that seemed to vibrate in the cold air. "Look what we have here, a lone wolf and its nursemaid." He smirked, a cruel twist of his lips. "Heard tell there was a big one limping around these parts. Good money for a pelt like that." Elias stood slowly, positioning himself between the hunter and wolf. "He's not for sale," he said, his voice level, betraying none of the apprehension coiling in his gut. He knew this type. Poachers were a plague in these mountains, driven by greed and a disregard for any law but their own. "Everything's for sale, eventually," the poacher countered, taking a step closer. His rifle shifted slightly, the movement subtle but clear in its intent. "Especially something on its last legs. You got him cornered, did you?" "Save me the trouble." Wolf, sensing the escalating tension, let out a low, warning growl, a sound far stronger than Elias had heard from it before. The poacher's eyes flickered to the wolf, a spark of amusement in their depths. "Feisty, isn't he? Still got some fight left. That'll make the trophy all the sweeter." He raised his rifle, aiming not at Wolf, but at Elias. "Step aside, old man. Don't want to have to put two of you down." Elias felt a surge of cold fury. This man, with his callous disregard for life, was everything Elias despised. "You won't touch him," Elias stated, his hand finally closing around the worn wood of his own rifle stock. The poacher chuckled, a dry, humorless sound. "Oh, I think I will, and you can't stop me." He began to squeeze the trigger. Then, shocking both men, Wolf moved. With a guttural snarl that echoed through the small tent, the wolf, despite its broken leg, lunged. It wasn't a graceful leap, more of a desperate, hobbled launch. But it was enough. He stumbled back, cursing, trying to regain his footing, his rifle clattering to the snow. Wolf, snarling, managed another clumsy lunge, snapping its jaws perilously close to the poacher's hand as he scrambled for his weapon. The poacher, his face contorted with rage and fear, scrambled backward, eyes wide with disbelief. He hadn't accounted for the wolf's tenacity, its primal instinct to protect, especially not one he'd assumed was on the verge of death. Elias, seizing the opportunity, lunged forward and kicked the fallen rifle away, sending it skittering across the snow. The poacher cursed, lunging for it himself, but Elias was quicker. He planted a boot firmly on the man's chest, pinning him to the ground. "Get out of here," Elias growled, his voice low and dangerous. "And if I ever see you in these mountains again, especially near him." He nodded towards Wolf, who was now panting heavily, still bristling but no longer attacking. "You'll regret it." The fury in Elias's eyes, coupled with the unexpected ferocity of the supposedly dying wolf, had clearly shaken him. He lay there for a moment, chest heaving, then a grudging nod. All right, I'm going." The poacher scrambled to his feet, grabbed his rifle, and without another word, vanished into the gathering twilight. Elias watched him go, then turned his attention back to Wolf. The wolf was trembling, its breath coming in ragged gasps, the exertion clearly taking its toll on its healing body. Elias knelt beside it, running a comforting hand over its head, marveling at the sheer will the animal had displayed. "You saved me, didn't you, old friend?" Wolf looked up at him, its amber eyes bright, a soft whine escaping its throat. The bond between them, already strong, had just been forged in a crucible of danger and defiance. Over the next few weeks, Wolf's recovery accelerated remarkably. The broken leg, though still needing support, was mending well, and its strength returned with astonishing speed. It still stayed close to Elias, following him on short, cautious forays around the camp, a silent, watchful companion. The distinction between wild animal and companion blurred with each passing day. Elias knew, logically, that a wild wolf could not and should not stay with a human indefinitely. Its place was in the wilderness, with its own kind. But the thought of letting Wolf go now felt like tearing a piece of himself away. One crisp morning, weeks after the encounter with the poacher, Elias woke to an empty tent. Then he saw it, tracks in the fresh snow, leading away from the camp, strong and steady, no longer hobbled. Wolf's tracks. He followed them instinctively, his heart heavy, until he reached the crest of a ridge. There, silhouetted against the rising sun, was Wolf. Not alone, however. Two other wolves, sleek and powerful, stood beside it, their tails wagging in a silent greeting. Wolf turned its head, its amber eyes meeting Elias's across the distance. There was a look of profound gratitude, a silent farewell, and then, with a final glance, Wolf turned and disappeared into the vast wilderness with its pack, a true creature of the wild once more. He had saved a life, and in doing so, had found a connection he never knew he needed. He was alone again, yes, but not entirely. He turned, a new kind of peace in his heart, and began his solitary walk back to camp, knowing that some stories, like some bonds, were meant to last a lifetime, even after they had ended. The setting sun cast long, blue shadows across the pristine landscape, painting the world in hues of lavender and deep indigo. Elias knew this wilderness intimately, every ridge and valley, every hidden den and hunting trail. It had been his sanctuary, his provider, his challenge, and his solace for decades. Yet, in all those years, he had never experienced a connection quite like the one he'd shared with Wolf. He'd grown accustomed to its silent companionship, the way it would subtly alert him to changes in the wind or the distant scent of elk. Wolf had become more than just a rescued animal. It had become a reflection of the wild spirit Elias himself cherished, a wildness that he, ironically, had tamed, if only for a fleeting period. Reaching his camp, Elias stoked the embers of his fire, watching sparks dance into the rapidly darkening sky. He prepared a simple meal, but the food tasted bland without the quiet sentinel nearby. He found himself glancing towards the spot where Wolf had rested, half expecting to see the amber eyes gleaming in the firelight. The silence of the tent felt heavier tonight, no longer a comforting solitude, but an echoing emptiness. Days bled into weeks. The snow began to melt, revealing the dormant greens of spring. But a subtle shift had occurred within him. He found himself more observant of the tracks in the snow, more attuned to the distant howls carried on the wind. He wasn't looking for Wolf specifically, not anymore. He knew the wolf had returned to its rightful place, but he was looking, perhaps, for a sign, a glimpse, an echo of the extraordinary encounter that had reshaped his understanding of his place in the wilderness. One afternoon, while checking his traps by a winding stream, Elias heard it, a distinct, powerful howl. It wasn't just any howl. It carried a unique timbre, a resonant depth that sent a shiver down his spine. It was Wolf. He paused, his breath catching in his throat, and looked up towards the high ridges where the sound had originated. He didn't see anything, of course, but he didn't need to. The sound was enough. It was a confirmation, a vibrant reminder that Wolf was alive, thriving, back where it belonged. A profound sense of peace settled over Elias. He hadn't rescued Wolf. He had merely helped it return to its true self. And in doing so, Wolf had, in its own way, rescued a part of Elias, showing him that even the most solitary life could be touched by unexpected connections, by moments of startling grace and fierce loyalty. The wilderness remained wild, untamed, and indifferent. But Elias now saw it through new eyes, eyes that had witnessed the shocking, beautiful truth of interconnectedness. He smiled, a rare, genuine smile that crinkled the corners of his eyes, and continued on his way, his steps lighter than before. The encounter with the poacher and Wolf's astonishing defense had solidified something within Elias. It wasn't just a matter of survival anymore. It was about protecting the delicate balance of this wild world he inhabited. The poacher represented a threat not just to individual animals, but to the very essence of the wilderness itself. Elias found himself more vigilant, his senses honed not just for the needs of the hunt, but for the subtle signs of human intrusion. One late spring afternoon, as the last remnants of snow clung to the highest peaks, Elias stumbled upon a small, illegal campsite hidden deep within a secluded valley. Ashore with the charred remains of a fire pit, he found discarded bait wrappers and, more disturbingly, several empty shotgun shells of a type not used by legitimate hunters. A cold dread seeped into him. These were the signs of serious poachers, likely after big game, perhaps even wolves for their pelts. His hand instinctively went to the familiar, comforting weight of his own rifle. He decided to observe, to understand their patterns before acting. For several days he shadowed the poachers from a distance, moving like a ghost through the dense pines, his knowledge of the terrain his greatest advantage. There were 3 of them, rough-looking men, operating with a disturbing efficiency. They spoke of a big one, a magnificent wolf that had been spotted recently, hinting at the very creature Elias had saved. A surge of protective fury washed over him. He knew he couldn't confront them directly, 3 against 1, especially when they were armed. He needed a plan, something to drive them out, without resorting to bloodshed, something that would make this wilderness seem less hospitable, more dangerous for them. He spent a night devising a strategy, drawing on every ounce of his extensive knowledge of the mountains and the animals within them. The next morning, under the pale pre-dawn light, Elias put his plan into motion. He systematically dismantled their snares, camouflaging his tracks with meticulous care. Then, he began to create diversions. He used scent lures, strategically placed, to draw bears and cougars closer to their camp. He mimicked the distress calls of deer, luring them through the poachers' expected hunting paths. He even, with a grim satisfaction, managed to trigger a small, controlled rock slide near their supply cache, creating a thunderous roar that would surely unnerve them. He worked tirelessly, moving from shadow to shadow, a silent guardian of the forest. By midday, the woods around the poachers' camp were alive with the sounds of agitated wildlife. The poachers, initially bewildered, grew increasingly agitated. Elias watched from a hidden perch as they argued amongst themselves, their bravado slowly eroding into nervous glances and muttered curses. They were used to being the hunters, not the hunted, and the wilderness was turning against them in ways they couldn't comprehend. The sun began its descent, casting long, eerie shadows that danced and writhed amongst the trees. The poachers, unnerved by the constant unsettling sounds and the inexplicable mishaps, were clearly on edge. Elias watched as they huddled around their dwindling fire, their voices hushed and strained. The wilderness, usually a source of easy prey for them, had become a living, breathing entity, seemingly conspiring against their presence. Suddenly, a series of sharp, cracking sounds echoed from the ridge above their camp, like branches snapping under immense weight. The poachers jumped, their heads whipping around, eyes wide with alarm. Elias, hidden in the dense undergrowth, had strategically placed several large, deadfall branches to tumble down the slope, creating a disorienting cacophony. It wasn't dangerous, just loud and unsettling. "What in the blazes was that?" one of them muttered, his voice laced with fear. "Probably just a deer," another tried to reassure, though his own voice trembled. But then, a low, guttural growl, deep and resonant, seemed to emanate from the very ground beneath their feet. The growl was followed by the distinct sound of heavy paws thudding against the earth, seemingly circling their perimeter. The poachers exchanged terrified glances. Their faces, previously hardened by years of illicit activity, were now pale and drawn. The bravado had completely evaporated, replaced by a primal fear of the unknown. They were out of their element, facing a wilderness that seemed to be actively hostile, a wilderness that was fighting back. "This ain't right," the third man whispered, his eyes darting nervously into the deepening shadows. "His place is cursed. We should go." The leader, the one who had confronted Elias earlier, tried to maintain a semblance of authority. "Don't be a fool. It's just animals. We're armed." But even his voice lacked conviction, and his gaze kept straying to the impenetrable darkness beyond their firelight. Another series of thuds, closer this time, followed by a faint, mournful howl that seemed to hang in the air, chilling them to the bone. Elias had perfected the sound of a lone wolf, a sound that spoke of ancient power and untamed wildness. It was the final straw. "This ain't worth it. There's something wrong here." The others, their resolve completely broken, quickly followed suit. They gathered their meager belongings in a frantic scramble, casting fearful glances into the surrounding darkness. They didn't even bother to extinguish their fire, leaving it to flicker weakly as they stumbled away, their movements clumsy and panicked. He knew they wouldn't be back. The wilderness had spoken, and they had listened. He waited until the last sound of their retreat had vanished, then emerged from his hiding spot. He approached their abandoned camp, extinguished the fire, and carefully gathered any remaining refuse, leaving no trace of their destructive presence. The air, once heavy with the scent of human fear and greed, now smelled clean and fresh, filled only with the crisp scent of pine and damp earth. Elias felt a profound sense of satisfaction. He had protected his home, and in doing so, had honored the unspoken pact he had made with Wolf. The mountains were safe, for now. Elias continued his solitary existence, but there was a subtle lightness in his step, a deeper appreciation for the rhythms of the wild. He still hunted, still trapped, but his actions were imbued with a conscious respect, a silent acknowledgement of the delicate balance he now felt a more active part of. One sweltering afternoon, while tracking a deer near a high mountain lake, Elias caught a flash of movement through the shimmering heat haze. His hand instinctively went to his rifle, but then he hesitated. It was a wolf, a large, powerful male, its fur gleaming like polished bronze in the sun. And beside it, a smaller, darker female and 3 clumsy, tumbling pups, their ears comically large for their small heads. A family. Elias lowered his rifle slowly, his heart quickening with a different kind of thrill. He moved silently, positioning himself behind a cluster of pines, and lifted his binoculars. The male wolf moved with a distinctive gait, a slight hitch in its left hind leg, barely perceptible now, but unmistakable to Elias. It was Wolf, and this was his family. He watched, captivated, as Wolf playfully nipped at the smaller female, then nudged one of the pups with his nose, guiding it towards a patch of shade. Wolf, the creature he had found broken and dying, was not only alive, but thriving, leading a new generation into the wilderness. A profound sense of wonder washed over Elias. He had intervened in the cycle of life and death, and in doing so, had played a part in this beautiful continuation. He was an outsider looking in, yet he felt inextricably linked to this wild family, a silent godfather to the thriving pack. There was no need for contact, no desire to interfere. The joy came from simply witnessing their existence, knowing he had contributed to it. He spent the rest of the afternoon observing them from a distance, a silent, unseen guardian. As the sun began to dip below the western peaks, casting long, golden light across the lake, Wolf lifted its head, its amber eyes scanning the tree line. For a fleeting moment, its gaze seemed to pause, as if sensing Elias's presence. Elias couldn't be sure, of course. It could have been anything. But in that instant, he felt a deep, abiding connection, an unspoken acknowledgement that transcended species and silence. Then, with a low rumble, Wolf gathered its family, and they moved as one into the deeper shadows of the forest, disappearing as silently as they had appeared. He felt a rare, profound peace settle over him. His life had been irrevocably changed by that chance encounter in the snow. He had faced down danger, nurtured a dying creature back to life, and in doing so, had discovered a depth of purpose and connection he never knew he was capable of. The wilderness, once merely his home, was now a sacred trust, a living testament to the shocking, beautiful things that could happen when a man opens his heart to the wild. He turned, the last rays of sunlight painting his weathered face, and began his walk home, his steps light with the quiet joy of a life truly lived. The following autumn brought with it a shift in the wind, a sharper bite in the air that spoke of the approaching winter. Elias, ever attuned to the subtle messages of the seasons, began his preparations with a renewed sense of purpose. This year, his solitary routines felt less like a chore and more like a privilege, a conscious participation in the grand, ancient cycle of the mountains. He gathered more firewood than usual, smoked more venison, and meticulously checked the integrity of his cabin, patching every crevice against the coming cold. He also found himself spending more time simply observing. He'd sit by the river, watching the salmon fight their way upstream, or perch on a high ridge, binoculars in hand, scanning the distant tree lines. He wasn't looking for trouble, but for signs of life, for confirmation that the wilderness he cherished remained vibrant and undisturbed. He occasionally saw tracks, wolf tracks, larger than average, often accompanied by smaller prints. He never followed them, respecting the creature's need for space, but their presence was a quiet comfort, a testament to the thriving ecosystem he had, in a small way, helped to protect. The air was still, heavy with unspoken anticipation. He stood on his porch listening. Then it came, a chorus of howls, rising from the valley below, echoing off the peaks. It wasn't just a single howl, or even two, it was a full, rich symphony, a pack song. And within that chorus, he distinctly recognized a deeper, more resonant voice, a lead baritone that could only belong to Wolf. The sound filled him, a profound, almost spiritual experience. It was a song of survival, of triumph. It spoke of hunts successful, of young ones nurtured, of a pack thriving in the vast, wild expanse. He was a part of it all, a silent guardian, a witness to the enduring power of nature. When the howling finally faded into the crisp night air, leaving only the whisper of the wind, Elias felt a sense of completion. His journey with Wolf had come full circle. From the brink of death to the heart of a thriving pack, the wolf's survival was a living testament to resilience and to the shocking, beautiful bonds that could form in the most unexpected places. Elias went back inside, the cold no longer biting, his heart full. He knew, with absolute certainty, that he was exactly where he was meant to be, a solitary figure forever interwoven with the wild, untamed spirit of the Montana mountains. As the years wove themselves into the fabric of Elias's life, the seasons continued their timeless dance, each bringing its own unique beauty and challenge to the Montana wilderness. He was no longer just a trapper or a hunter. He had become, in his own quiet way, a custodian of the land, a silent protector. The memory of Wolf, vibrant and potent, remained a constant presence, a reminder of the extraordinary bond that had reshaped his solitary existence. He continued his routines, his movements as fluid and efficient as ever, but there was an added dimension to his vigilance. He would occasionally find signs of human encroachment, a discarded plastic bottle, a faint ATV track, hints of activity that spoke of outsiders. Each time, he would act, subtly guiding errant hikers away from sensitive areas, dismantling the rare, ill-placed snare left by an amateur. He preferred prevention over confrontation, using his intimate knowledge of the terrain to make the wilderness seem less inviting to those who sought to exploit it. He became a whisper in the wind, a shadow in the trees, an almost mythical figure to the few who dared venture deep into his domain. One harsh winter, when the snow lay deeper than Elias had seen in decades, and the cold bit with a ferocity that threatened to crack bone, he was out checking his distant traps. The silence was absolute, broken only by the crunch of his snowshoes and the whistle of the wind. He was tired, the deep snow making every step an effort. As he rounded a familiar bend in a frozen creek, he saw it. A wolf, caught in a legitimate legal snare, its leg twisted, whimpering softly. It was a young male, not wolf, but clearly from the same lineage, judging by the amber glint in its eyes. The snare was tight, designed to hold, not to kill, but the animal was clearly in distress. He knew what he had to do. He didn't hesitate. Speaking in low, soothing tones, the same ones he'd used with Wolf all those years ago, Elias knelt down. The wolf thrashed, a desperate, pained struggle, but Elias's touch was firm and practiced. He worked quickly, his hands numb with cold but precise, releasing the tension on the snare. The moment the pressure eased, the wolf pulled its leg free, limping badly but free nonetheless. It stood for a moment, trembling, its eyes fixed on Elias, a flicker of something unreadable in their depths. Then, with a sudden burst of energy, it turned and vanished into the snow-laden trees, leaving only a faint trail of blood drops behind. Elias watched it go, a quiet satisfaction spreading through him. He hadn't sought this moment, but he had answered its call. He knew the chances of the young wolf surviving were now far greater, its wild instincts and the resilience of its kind giving it a fighting chance. As he resumed his slow trek back to his cabin, the immense silence of the winter wilderness seemed less oppressive, more profound. He was old now, his movements a little stiffer, his face more deeply lined by sun and wind. But his purpose remained clear, his connection to this land and its wild inhabitants as strong as ever. He was Elias, the mountain man, and the mountains, in their silent, ancient way, were home. The long years had indeed left their mark on Elias. His once sharp eyes, though still keenly observant, were now framed by deep-set wrinkles, and his movements, while deliberate, carried a hint of the stiffness that comes with age. Yet, the wilderness, in its infinite wisdom, had granted him a resilience that defied the creeping hand of time. He was a part of the landscape, as much a fixture as the ancient pines and the unyielding granite peaks. One mild summer evening, a few years after the incident with the young wolf, Elias sat on his porch, whittling a piece of cedar into a smooth, elegant bird. The scent of pine and damp earth filled the air, mingling with the distant cry of a hawk. He wasn't alone. A large gray wolf lay curled at the edge of his porch, its head resting on its paws, amber eyes half closed in contentment. It wasn't Wolf, but a direct descendant, one of the pups from that very first family Elias had seen by the lake. This wolf, which Elias simply called Shadows in his mind, had begun appearing near his cabin sporadically a few years prior, always keeping a respectful distance. Over time, that distance had lessened. Until now, it often sought out Elias's quiet presence. Shadow was a magnificent creature, bearing a striking resemblance to its elder, Wolf, in its sheer size and the intelligent glint of its amber eyes. It never demanded attention, never imposed its presence, but simply was there, a quiet affirmation of the enduring bond between Elias and the wild. Sometimes, Shadow would bring him small offerings, a freshly caught rabbit, or a particularly vibrant feather, left carefully on the porch as a silent gift. Elias would always accept these gestures, leaving out a piece of dry meat in return, a reciprocation of respect. Their connection was entirely unspoken, a language of shared understanding that transcended words. Elias would often find himself talking aloud to Shadow, recounting the day's observations, musing about the changing seasons, or simply enjoying the comforting presence. Shadow, in turn, would respond with a soft flick of an ear, a shift in its posture, or a slow blink of its wise eyes. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in fiery oranges and soft purples, a lone howl drifted down from the upper slopes. It was a familiar sound, the deep, resonant call of an elder wolf. Shadow lifted its head, its ears swiveling towards the sound, and let out a soft, answering whine. It was Wolf, calling to its lineage, still out there, a patriarch of the pack. Shadow rose gracefully, stretched its powerful limbs, and then, with a final lingering look at Elias, melted into the twilight. Elias watched it go, a warmth spreading through him. He was an old man now, living a solitary life, but he was far from alone. He was connected to the pulse of the mountains, to the intricate web of life that thrived within them. He had found his place, not just in the wilderness, but as a part of it, a man forever bound by the shocking, beautiful encounter that had begun with a wolf on the brink of death. His story was now deeply etched into the very fabric of the Montana wild, a legend whispered on the wind, a testament to the profound and enduring power of connection between man and nature. He felt the slowing pace of his own life, mirroring the ancient, deliberate rhythm of the mountains. Shadow, or sometimes another younger wolf from the pack, would still visit, a silent, comforting presence on the periphery of his cabin, a constant reminder of the profound connection he shared. One particularly serene autumn day, the air crisp with the scent of fallen leaves and the distant wood smoke from his own chimney, Elias sat on his porch, a worn book open on his lap, though his gaze was fixed on the sprawling panorama before him. The peaks were dusted with the first light snow, shimmering under a pale, gentle sun. He breathed in deeply, the cool air filling his lungs, a familiar comfort. He closed his eyes, listening to the subtle symphony of the wilderness. The whisper of the wind through the pines, the distant cry of a raven, the quiet rustle of leaves as a deer moved unseen. A soft weight settled against his side. He opened his eyes. Shadow was there, its head resting gently on his knee, amber eyes looking up at him with an ancient understanding. Elias reached out a trembling hand, stroking the thick, soft fur. It was a moment of perfect peace, a culmination of decades spent in solitude, yet never truly alone. As the sun began its slow descent, painting the sky in hues of fiery orange and soft violet, Elias felt a gentle tiredness wash over him, deeper than any fatigue he had ever known. It wasn't pain, just a profound sense of letting go, of merging with the vast silent beauty that had been his life. The next morning the sun rose, casting its golden light over the mountains, illuminating the quiet cabin. He had returned to the wilderness, not as a hunter or a guardian, but as a part of its eternal cycle, his spirit forever intertwined with the wild heart of the Montana mountains, a shocking, beautiful testament to a life lived in perfect harmony with nature.